Nice.
Well, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Thank you so much, Traci, for that warm introduction. We are excited to be joined by two of the top schools in the state as we discuss achieving inclusive excellence. When we think about inclusive excellence, we think about the work, the collaboration, and the economic impact. Adopting the means of cohesive, coherent, and collaborative integration of diversity, equity, and inclusion, all in the pursuit of excellence. As we redefine our path forward, let's jump right in. Dr. Johnson and Dr. Williams, thank you so much for being here with us today. What is your understanding of inclusive excellence? How does the concept differ from traditional diversity, equity, and inclusion?
So thank you for having me this morning. I'm excited to be here. When we're talking about inclusive excellence is a framework that really encompasses the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion to really be at the core and center of universities and organizations to make sure that it's woven throughout not just the strategic plans, the curriculum, what we're doing in recruitment, supporting students and faculty and staff, as well as our research, what's going across the research thrust. So it's really a culmination of that and a progression in which we've seen going from, minority to diversity, now inclusive excellence, which is the framework incorporating all of that.
I love that, the framework and the research.
Yeah.
Dr. Williams.
That's great. Thanks so much for having me, and I'm always glad to share the stage with my awesome and intelligent counterpart from Clemson. Our universities are used to battling on the field and on the court, but it's always great to when we get a chance to work together and kind of share the stage. And I don't have very much to add except that what we're always thinking about within that inclusive excellence framework is how do we make sure that these ideals of inclusion and excellence are so inextricably linked that you see them together, right? So when you think about the field of higher education, but even if you're just looking at the Fortune 500 or the Fortune 100 companies, you're watching organizations and you can choose one, show me one that you think is leading in any space, and I will show you back an organization that has said we also have to reflect the communities that we serve in, right?
Absolutely.
Reflect our customer base, make sure that our leadership is reflective of the desired employee body. So what it tells us is that we work better together when we are together, right? It tells us that our organizations are going to thrive when they're representative, when individuals are allowed to bring themselves fully and truly and authentically to the space, right? So, I love the inclusive excellence framework because even in our conversations with Felicia, I'm sure it's the same for you, when we talk about expanding the lens, some things that folks will always go back to is, we may want to make sure we don't lower standards, right? And I'm like, well, how did you get to that place from me talking about our organization, our institution, whatever we're representing, being more reflective and representative?
Absolutely.
Why is it that your mind goes there, right? So, and I think as we frame up and work towards inclusive excellence, it removes that framework, right? So we can see these ideals as inextricably linked and operating together.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I love that you said better together when we are together. And it's all about that research, that framework, and linking all of those together. So thank you for that. Can you provide us insight in the decision to rename your DEI office? What was the rationale behind the change? Sure. And how does it align with the university's vision of inclusive excellence?
Sure. So I think for me as a practitioner in this space, I joined the University of South Carolina in the year 2020, right? In the summer of 2020, as we think about what was happening then, as we were in very much a reckoning as it relates to race in this country after the murder of George Floyd. And we fast forward 3.5 years, and we have to recognize the political realities that we find ourselves in, right? I operate at a university where I'm in constant contact with my counterparts in states like Texas,
right.
In states like Florida, right? States that have passed legislation to remove the university's ability to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So as I am in conversation with our president and our leadership, what I don't want an acronym to be is a stumbling block to the actual work, right? So regardless of what we call it, and those words do have matter, they have meaning, they matter, they're important to me as well as our community. But what I have to also recognize is that as a leader in the space, that I want to make sure that there will be someone to continue that work behind me decades after. And how do we lay that foundation, right? So what we were able to do is kind of reframe what that work looks like in the area of access, opportunity, community engagement for us at the University of South Carolina in response and in recognition to that current political reality that we find ourselves in. But what we are signaling to our community and what I hope all of our participants are getting as well is that there's still so much work to be done. Right, regardless of what we call it, regardless of the acronyms, the taglines, the frameworks, the titles that we use, we know that there is still so much left for us to do, especially in this state. And what we have to recognize is that we're doing this work at a time where it is being heavily and highly politicized, purposefully obfuscated, and we don't have to like it, but we have to recognize it, right? We have to be responsive to it. And I think all of us are figuring out what that looks like in our own spaces.
And would you say that that's moving our path forward as we're recognizing who we are, but also including that diversity, equity, and inclusion, all encompassing in that inclusive excellence?
I think it has to, what I had to come to grips with, and as I talk to my colleagues, is that, well, it's always looked like this, right?
Right.
Like, hasn't it always looked like this? I think about our campuses. Right, I think about if you just pick Clemson and USC, right? I think about our campuses. I think about the first African Americans, the first pioneers that traversed those campuses, and I think about what their experience was like, right? And sometimes that provides me comfort and solace as I come home on that hard day when I'm thinking through what those individuals had to work through.
Right.
So I think this path towards equity, this path towards justice and diversity has always looked like a winding one, right? Especially in a state like South Carolina. So we shouldn't be shocked that we find ourselves where we find ourselves politically, but I am optimistic in sort of inspired by the will and the spirit to keep pushing forward in spite of that, because that's what we've always done as well.
Thank you for sharing. Dr. Johnson, anything you wanted to add?
Sure. So I think it's important that we know that this is an evolution, right? And as we know that the climate in the nation is a different one than what it's been over the last 40 years. But I think it's important when we're moving towards an inclusive excellence framework. Inclusive means including all, right? And so when we have been doing this diversity work, diversity are you think of the number, the data sets. I say data, it shapes the story, it doesn't tell the story, right? And so I think moving towards an inclusive framework and encompassing, name means everything, right? It's a lot in a name. Just like we take pride in who named us and where our name comes from, that's important. And so for us, with Clemson, I've been there now about 7 months, and I'm coming from a previous institution where I was 20 years, and I can tell you, when we did a name change, it was to be inclusive of everything that we do, and to align with the new strategic priorities that are taking place. But as Julian said, to do the work, we're still going to get the work done. We just have to do it in a different manner. And that's important. For us in this room, we have to recognize that and know that moving forward, things have to shift.
Absolutely, thank you. How does your university address the misconception that diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are a zero-sum game, where the advancement of unrepresented groups come to the expense of others? What steps are being taken to promote a more comprehensive understanding of the benefit and positive outcome associated with inclusive excellence?
That's a great question. So it's not a zero sum when you say you help one, you help all, really, right? what we're doing, we're talking about different programs that we have. So if we're actually say, do you like the LIFE program? What is LIFE? LIFE is learning is for everyone. That's a program that we have for students who have neurodiversity, who have a certificate, and they're involved at Clemson, and they're living on campus and their experience, and so they're getting in front of people that they never would have gotten in front of. So exposure is everything. I also say when we're talking about, we already know innovation. When you have diverse teams, you have diverse thought, right? I tell this story all the time. When you think about when we were doing the water, the invention of the sensor waters, when you go into the bathroom to wash your hand. Well, when they first did this in a team, the innovation team wasn't really diverse. So when they did it, when you put your hand under the water and the backside and your skin is darker, the water didn't come on. If you turn it this way, the water comes on. So we would have had a diverse team with someone who had a different complexion in the beginning. We would have, caught that on the front end. So those are where I'm saying there's no zero, it's a win-win for all.
Thank you.
And so much for us at the University of South Carolina has been about access, right? How do we make sure that a university which is where we're celebrating now at the University of South Carolina the 60th year of our desegregation in 1963 and the 150th year of the first desegregation of the university during Reconstruction, right? So both of those anniversaries culminating together, and then I think about this theme of access, right? Where we are working diligently to make sure that our university is accessible to students across the state from a broad spectrum of backgrounds, but also faculty and staff that want to come and be a part of that vibrant academic community, right? So we're the state's flagship. We have, I think, a moral as well as a larger responsibility to maintain that accessibility. And it's a space where, as it related to those two anniversaries, where we can point to direct times in history where that hasn't been the case, right? Absolutely. And it is our responsibility to work through changing that. I think the challenge that we have and the challenge that we operate in, right, is from my perspective the purposeful obfuscation of the work, right? I've had legitimate conversations with folks where I've had to talk to them about the practitioners that operate in this space, not just in higher ed, but across the state, across the country. We're not out here teaching individuals to hate America, right? We're not sowing dissension, and we are, if anything, trying to make sure that our spaces, our workspaces, are places where all individuals can bring themselves, right? But I think we are at this really tough tension point, right? Where if we can pit these ideas against each other, right? And I think one of the things that we do and work really hard on, and I think many of you do as well, what we're essentially trying to do is make our organizations, our institutions, make them closer to their mission statements, right? If you read the University of South Carolina's motto or Clemson's or anyone else's, right, that mission statement is artfully crafted. It has these lofty and just beautiful expressions of who we desire to be, right? And then you ask somebody that works there or goes there or is in school there what their day-to-day is like. And it's a lot of times, particularly if that person is from a marginalized identity, it doesn't sound anything like who we are saying we are and who we espouse ourselves and aspire to be. So how do we close that gap, right? So when I can talk to individuals about that, then they understand. When I can talk to them about the expansive ways that diversity, equity, and inclusion work encompasses those with disabilities, right? Those individuals from the rural parts of our state, individuals that have served in our armed forces and making sure that they have opportunities on our campuses as well. Then they start to see this sort of expansive framework, and I think that helps, right? But we also have to have a conversation about race in South Carolina. We still need a conversation about race in South Carolina and across the country as well. So we can't be so fearful of that conversation that we run from the rest of them. But we still have to have those in-depth and challenging conversations as well.
Absolutely. And I think that, that brings me to a point. What you said is help all, expose all, and access, right? In promoting inclusive excellence, how does the university plan to foster collaboration in partnership with external stakeholders such as our local communities, our businesses, organizations to collectively address diversity, equity, and inclusion and those challenges that we just talked about.
So I'll tell you the one thing that, several things that we're doing with leadership of our Associate Vice President for Access and Equity and Supply Diversity, Mr. Jerry Knighton. We actually work with minority supplier diversity business here across the Carolinas and Virginia, and Clemson has actually this year won the corporate award for doing this work, which is really big. Another thing, we have faculty, we have a large NSF grant, National Science Foundation, where we're working with other institutions, historically Black colleges and university, to help students learn artificial intelligence and get them trained to go into this area in the workforce. In regards to partnering with corporations, we're partnering with companies on the latest research that's coming to fruition. So we're partnering with community centers, right? So I think that's the big key in this, especially during this time. Collaboration is key. There's power in numbers, right? So for us, these are the different ways that we collaborate to get the work done. Collaborating with you all, yes. Collaborating with many different organizations across the state.
I think about our two universities, our flagship and our land grant, and I think our responsibility to solve problems, right? I think that at its core, what public education is designed to do is to solve problems and create innovation for the states that they operate in. And we're here to talk about sort of what that economic impact looks like as well. But I think about the ways that our School of Public Health and School of Medicine in Greenville and Columbia are working to eliminate health disparities across the state. And what we know is that those health disparities run along racial and economic lines, right?
Absolutely.
You can look at zip codes here in South Carolina and find some of the highest rates of the most debilitating health challenges. And I think about those are the excellent ways that our faculty are partnering with students and the community to be able to do that. And then I think about one of the things that one of our crown jewels at the University of South Carolina is actually our Center for Civil Rights History and Research, right? At a time where we are having debates about our students' ability to read about those civil rights pioneers, I think about the role that South Carolinians have played in this fight for justice, right? So our Center for Civil Rights History and Research has partnered with a number of companies here in South Carolina, Boeing being one of them and others, to spread out across the state and tell that story, right? Tell the story of South Carolina in the civil rights movement. And by doing so, you can see the parallels between that movement decades ago and the movement that we're in right now, right? And I think we have to learn those lessons. We have to talk about those lessons. We have to support, what that work looks like. And I think that's why it's incumbent that this state has two great research universities, right? That we have other awesome institutions of higher education spread out across the state as well, because it's through education that changes lives and changes trajectories. I'm a product of it. I'm sure others in the room are a product of that trajectory changing as well, but we have to do more of that. And I think that's where events like this and partnership across the board will help us do so.
Awesome. I think about collaboration and looking at so many amazing leaders and business in the room, right? This is the start. This is not the finish. Yeah. As we continue to redefine our path forward, collaboration and resources are truly going to be key.
And what I will say is that we need you all's voice tremendously, right? I think, I've been at USC 3 years. Folks might be a little tired of me, by then, because they kind of know what I'm going to say. My colleagues, as much as I love them, they understand my lens in this. But when I can point to the leaders across our state in the business community, the ones that will be employing our graduates of both of our institutions, the ones that are coming to our universities and telling us this is how we need these individuals prepared. It would be great to get that message, as well as to say, across the board, is that we also need a future workforce that is globally minded, that is globally centered, that can operate, that has thought through these concepts and ideas during their higher education experience. That matters a lot, right? Absolutely. It matters a lot in the circles and in the rooms and meetings that Felicia and I are in to be able to do that.
Absolutely. In your opinion, what are the key benefits that organizations can gain by embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion as a core value and integrating it through the institutional fabric? How does this approach contribute to the long-term success and competitiveness in a rapid changing global landscape?
Ooh, that's a big question. So I think about one of my favorite poets, Maya Angelou, and she said it's like tapestry, right? The thread that weaves throughout. You have to keep weaving, and weaving meaning threads to become strong. And I think when it comes to this work that we're doing, it's very important. We have to be front and center. Where everyone comes and they say, oh man, this is a different time, and how are you doing? We're used to this. Right? We've been having boots on the ground kind of work for decades. And we have to show that this work is important by being, number one, I am a data person, but showing the impact, and even though data just shapes the story, it doesn't tell the story, but also showing when you're wanting to double research, when you're putting in these big grand proposals at the National Science Foundation, National Institute of Health, the Department of Energy, they want a broadening participation section. They want to see how are we impacting when it comes to inclusive excellence to this space. When we're talking about industry and corporate entities, you're looking at how the demographics are shifting across the nation. They want a workforce that can actually speak to these new demographics. When we're talking about universities and rankings, accreditation, diversity is part, you're getting actually evaluated on this. This is not just a checkbox.
That's right.
We're making sure that it's being done. If you're accredited for nursing, accreditation for engineering, accreditation for business, I can go on and on and on. All of that is necessary, but then also not just as South Carolinians, but as a nation, it is vital that we really pay attention to this space and make sure that we are being inclusive. For us to be globally competitive, it's a must. Yep. And I think too, showing not just, institutions of higher learning, you have corporate entities, you have your K-12 areas and communities across the nation. This is why it's important. Because as a nation, if we are going to be globally competitive, we have to do this.
Keep weaving. I like that.
That's great. Now, I don't have much to add except I think that competitiveness point is really key, right? Because particularly you all and our folks that came to hear from us today, spend time in industries where it's taught how do we attract talent, right? And the good part about my job and my colleagues' job is we work with that talent every day. We get a chance. Now they frustrate us. I've got a couple student workers in my office that I'm just, part of my job is make sure they get through the university, but they're going to be excellent employees, I promise. What that looks like though is that our students are so far ahead of us in conceptualizing. Now they don't have it perfect, right? But what they do have is an understanding of what they would like their desired state to be, right? They understand they've grown up in a highly connected time and age. They think about they want a job with impact, right? They want to be able to leave a legacy and they want to have all those things. Now, some of that might be confronted by just the realities of being a professional. But what I think about the workspaces and places that they will thrive in, right? The ones that you all are designing and thinking about how do you create. And those have to be diverse spaces from a broad perspective if we are to keep that talent here in South Carolina and keep them moving forward, right? Because they have already said that they want to live and work in spaces where they see themselves reflected, right. that are intentional about what inclusion and equity look like. This is already their framework before they get to us, right? Before they get to Clemson and USC, they've already conceptualized what this looks like. So I think we've got a lot of catching up to do. Right. To be able to keep that talent here in the state. And one of the things that concerns me as we are, making decisions, sort of long-term decisions about the direction of the state is what does that then signal to the graduates of our universities in terms of their futures here in this state? I would love for all of them to make South Carolina their home. and make your companies and industries where they invest their time. But that's going to require all of us to create and set those conditions. And if we just listen to that future workforce, they've already told us what they want and what they're expecting.
Yes.
I think what we have to do is to deliver that, and I think it's going to be incumbent to be able to do so as we want to remain and increase our competitive and our economic innovation across the state.
Right.
And let me interject
Absolutely.
real quick. When he mentioned about the new workforce that we're recruiting, you all have to remember also that, they are leaving due to culture and climate at their organization. Okay? So they are either selecting your organization or they're not selecting your organization based on your culture and climate. They're looking at work-life balance. They're looking at, do I have flexible schedule? Do they have affinity groups? Right. Are they showing me room where I can actually, go out and do service with my community? Is there room for growth? So these are different things that that I see, not just with those new students who are graduating and going into the workforce, but those of us who are seasoned as well. After COVID shifted the game.
Yes, it did.
Right? COVID actually put a spotlight on inequities that we saw across many different areas, but it also taught us to value the here and now. Right? So that even shifted our perspective when it comes to, inclusive excellence, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what does that mean for us personally?
Right, and I could speak to that personally. Being in a corporate setting, for my company, we manage malls across the United States, and we so see that, if you click on our website, and that's the first place I'm constantly asking, how did you find us? Where did you find us? We want people who look like us. Yep. We want people where we feel belong. We want that work-life balance. We incorporate it where you get 16 hours of volunteer time. We talk about that constantly because we see that the workforce is changing, and truly, if you want to retain that talent,
absolutely,
you have got to be moving on that path forward so that you're creating a space where people feel like they belong and want to be there.
And I watched it. I taught a class in our business school last year, our Masters in Human Resources class, right? And I watched a really talented group of future HR professionals, and they're being recruited, right? Folks are sending to your campus, hey, we would like to recruit you. And I watched those students, particularly the students of color, and they were a lot of the companies wanted them, but they watched who you send, right? These students watch who you send to campus,
absolutely.
Right? So if your desire is to recruit diverse talent from a Clemson or a USC, you would better send a diverse team of recruiters and representatives, or you're already behind the 8 ball, right? Because I can bet you that our students are seeing that. And what I also tell you is that it's not just your employees of color. Right. One of the things that we talk about at our university that we see, that we conceptualize this and think that it's just the first generation students, or it's just the Black and brown students or indigenous students that care about this, right? And it's not. It absolutely is not. That all of our students are self-selecting or not selecting where they're going to invest their time and energy, whether it's in higher ed or whether it's in their future employer, based on how much of themselves they're going to be able to bring to the table, right? So I think it's incumbent that we create and set those conditions on the front end so we can retain those individuals on the back end as well.
Absolutely. I think when we think about inclusive excellence, it's not a one shot.
Yep.
I think about what you said is weaving through the fabric. It's in everything that we do, even from recruiting, right? As a company and a business, it's even when you think about recruiting that person and who you're sending to those job fairs.
Yes. Yep.
What are you reflecting? What are you saying when my first impressions? We all know about first impressions, right? Yep. So for organizations, and this will be our final question before we take questions and answers from the audience. For organizations who are considering a pivot in the name of their DEI office to more accurately reflect the ongoing work and evolving priorities, what advice would you give them in terms of effective communicating this in a continuing and diverse equity and inclusion space, all while signaling a fresh perspective of renewed focus? Are there any best practices that you've learned from your own institution that you can share with us?
So what I would say is and I'll keep this brief because I'm really curious to hear the other responses, is that you don't just change a name to change a name, right? Your folks that are leading this work, regardless of what you call it, I don't know who they all are, but I know they all need more resources.
That's right.
I know that. I know that having done it, I already know that, right? They need more resources, right? They need more bandwidth. They need more courage from leadership
Absolutely.
to be able to set the conditions for this work to be successful. So if folks are, let's just change the name and kind of put this, well, that's not going to do, if anything, that's going to highlight the need for additional support, right? So why not do that, right? Why not do both? Why not use this as an inflection point to reinvest, to refocus, to make sure that these ideas that we talk about are seen across the organization, right? And that's going to require some things of folks,
yes,
right? It's going to require something of leadership. It's going to require some courage in this moment. What it will ultimately require is us to be able to understand that this isn't, the things that matter to us organizationally, we don't fail on, right? We make sure that there are folks responsible for. We make sure that we are meeting those objectives, right? We're not going to leave it up to chance to make sure that the bills get paid and employees get paid and we're meeting our bottom line and we're not running the entity into the ground, right? We're going to say, no, we're going to make sure this happens every year. But when it comes to our values and our goals around diversity, equity, and inclusion, we are too quick to say, oh, well, we tried, and we'll just give it a good shot, good go again next year. We don't do that with anything else that matters to us, right? So how do we raise this work to that level, right? And if anything, it is our ability to meet that standard is inextricably intertwined in our ability to make sure that our workplaces and workspaces are reflective of the individuals that make us go, that make us great as a people. So what I'll say is use this as an inflection point to reinvest, to redefine, and to resource the broad swath of individuals that should hopefully be doing this work in any company and organization as well.
Thank you.
And I would say, to piggyback, is that you need to be really strategic and intentional. As we said earlier, there's a lot in a name, but it's more than a name. You need to first look at your constituencies, get buy-in, talk, and so everyone is not like blindsided, right? Get buy-in so they feel vested, input. Making sure that it's aligned with not only just your strategic plans, why are we doing this, right? Explain what's happening. Also do listening sessions, surveys, and then have a committee that weaves that in. But that's just the front part. That's the planning part. The next piece is working with your marketing team and how are we gonna to roll this out, right? There's a plan in this. I was just reading a book and your brand, who's wearing your t-shirt. When you think about, branding, a lot goes into that. Absolutely. And that's what this is. Yeah. What we're doing, we're redefining to elevate, to take what we're doing to the next level. Absolutely. That's great. The advice I say is be strategic, intentional, and get buy-in and make sure you have a plan in which you're actually rolling this out.
I heard, I was at a conference and somebody said, when I first heard inclusive excellence, at this conference somebody said, who doesn't want to be included? Think about that for yourself. In a room today, you wanted to be intentionally included in today's session. Think about that for your jobs and your businesses and your organization. Who doesn't want to be included? Yeah, and I think that redefines our path forward and looks at how we elevate to the next level. That's awesome. We're going to open it up for questions, and I will tell you I cannot see from the light, so somebody on the ground there will have to help me. Natasha, I know you're somewhere in the room, and we have mics. Yep, if you'll just raise your hand and somebody will come to you. I can't see you, but I'm going to go with it.
It's my turn. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shantavia Johnson. I actually work at Clemson. And I have a question about recruiting and admissions in light of what happened in the Supreme Court recently with Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard. And I'm just curious from your perspectives how recruitment and admission standards have been impacted by this case at your institutions, but then also with the companies, the industry partners, the employers who you work with.
So I can start.
Yeah,
I think the question has, how has the SCOTUS decision impacted our admission and recruiting? Was that the question? Oh, okay, so for us at Clemson, we're doing a holistic review process. That's what we've been doing for some time now. So it really has not yet impacted us. We're looking, we have a team that's, from every angle, from not just admissions, but financial aid, seeing what may be impacted. So we're all in this new space, except we're learning from our counterparts that we're in California with Proposition 209, in Michigan and in Texas. One thing I can say, and that I've told Clemson, I'm telling everyone here, is then this is where we can collaborate and partner, is that research shows that race-neutral admission practices do not yield the same result as race-based admission practices. We know that, it's a fact. The universities that will be impacted are those selective elite universities, which probably are about 120 in the nation, that will be impacted by this SCOTUS decision. With that being said, what we're seeing too is that they're going to have to, we have to put more resources, people and money into this space now, because we show that race neutral, those schools, those universities that had the Prop 209, had the Michigan case, that have moved away from race-based admissions, they ended up putting more resources in those areas, meaning going out to the schools, building resources, programs to actually pipelining programs, partnerships with 2-year and 4-year institutions. So you're seeing many different things that are taking place, and that's what we're seeing at Clemson.
Yeah, and I think it's a good question, because I think the Supreme Court the Supreme Court has been signaling this probably for the last 20 years,
Absolutely.
right? I was a student at the University of Michigan from 2000 to 2004 for my undergraduate, and this was very much a part of my undergraduate life, is thinking about what is the Supreme Court saying about my alma mater's admissions policy. What I'll say is that as my colleague mentioned, only a small subset of institutions were utilizing race as a narrowly tailored factor in its admissions policy. Mm-hmm. Most institutions like USC, like Clemson, were utilizing a holistic admissions practice that looks at the entire student, where that student comes from, the grades, SAT scores, all of those things, and then utilizing that to make its admissions decision. So from a day-to-day perspective, it hasn't changed much at USC, but what we have endeavored to do, not just in response to the Supreme Court decision, but in response to that obligation to provide access that I talked about, is we've just recently launched a couple of initiatives, really spearheaded by our president, Michael Amaritis, to create additional accessibility and pathways and access points to the University of South Carolina, right? So if a student, any student across the state, if they finish in the top 10% of their graduating class, they will automatically be admitted to the University of South Carolina, right? So if I'm a student in Columbia, or if I'm a student in Fairfield, or anywhere else, right, and I'm one of those high achieving students, we want you at USC, right? And we also know that access without opportunity is, and we know that college costs, right? So if you're also a student that has been admitted, but it also comes from a family that makes less than $80,000, that student will have the opportunity to attend the University of South Carolina tuition free, right? So we know that we have to do more. Thank you. There's more for us to do in that space. We have an accessibility challenge across the state, right? We have dwindling numbers of students that are even electing to attend higher education across the state as well. So what I think it's going to be incumbent upon my university and others is to more partnership and connections like my colleague mentioned with K through 12, right? Yes. I've run into so many middle schoolers talented middle schoolers across the state, and you ask them, what are you doing, right? What's the pathway look like? And they've already decided that I can't go to college, right? They've decided at that formative age that because they see their circumstances, right? They know it costs. They may see obstacles in their way. And how do we work to remove those obstacles so they see opportunity in front of them? I remember being one of those middle schoolers as well, but thankfully I had folks in my corner that said we will work. And I think the magic of the work that we get a chance to do every day is thinking about how do we remove those obstacles for students, faculty, and staff members at our universities, but also what that looks like more broadly as well.
I agree. Thank you. We have another question in the audience. I see a question here.
Hi, my name is Candy Ortiz. I am a program coordinator at the Greenville Literacy Association. I currently just made the switch from working in higher education to adult education. And my question to you is, what advice would you give a young professional who has been disappointed with DEI in an institution or organization? What advice would you give that institution or organization to continue to improve that DEI?
I would say mentorship. Find out who your mentor, find your champion, find your sponsor, right? That helps you develop in this work and connects you with people along the way can help you grow. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and I think for our young professionals that are entering the space, it is challenging, right? And we so much, and this won't be the first time you will be disappointed but what I think it's how do we respond to that, right? So what I will say is advocacy, self-advocacy is extremely important, right?
Absolutely.
I think that's going to, if I look out over my career, it has been that self-advocacy. It also is to know when, and I folks will come to me and say, how do you know when is it time to make a move? How do you know when it's time to stay? And I always say, well, the job will tell you both, right? It'll tell you when it's time to stay, it's time to invest, it's time, there's still more for you to do here, there's mentorship, there's support, and it'll also tell you when, hey, this might be the end of the road as well, but I think advocate for yourself in that, and when you're doing so, when you find yourself at a seat and at a table where nobody else looks like you, you've got to advocate for others, right? And I think that's going to be key. It isn't easy. It will be challenging. But I think when you do have that space and opportunity, is advocating for the individuals that may never have a chance to sit at that table, right? I think about the individuals that come in, that I talk to, spend an inordinate amount of time talking to, that make our university go, right? I talked to one of our custodians, Benny, and we just talk about how did USC do last Saturday, what's going on in his life, and I think about the meetings that I then walk into after having a great conversation with him. And it's my responsibility to make sure that I am bringing that voice to the table. And we may all find ourselves in that space at some time. It's how do we respond to it as well. So advocate for yourself. As we mentioned, find that mentorship, and then listen, right? Listen to what's happening around you and then decide accordingly from there.
I would also add, challenge the status quo, right? When you're in that room and you're in that seat, speak up. Yeah. I think so often we sit back and we say, man, if we did this, or we should have did this, or speak up, be that voice. It's going to be uncomfortable. We talked about earlier, I was speaking to Juana, and we talked about it strikes conversations, and sometimes conversations are difficult. And when you are there and you're feeling not included, right? You're not feeling like we're doing things, or my role is not feeling inclusive, then we have to speak up. And you have to challenge the status quo, and you may never know that it's somebody else sitting in the room just waiting for that opportunity to create that committee or find that mentor with you, or say, I was at another role where my company did this well, and I'm so glad you brought that up. So be that voice if nobody else is, and it's gonna be uncomfortable sometimes, but continue to push forward.
And I'd like to add two more things with you being a female. Remember, too, why you got into this work. Right? There are going to be times that it hits you and you're like, ugh. But remember why you got into the work, okay? And lastly, I'll say too, be your authentic self,
Absolutely.
okay? Show up and be you. In who, be comfortable, and it takes time in who you are, because then people are also, you're impacting your environment. They're learning just from you being present.
Absolutely. All right, I think I've seen another question. How are we on time? Last question. Have a question out there? You know, I can't
I see a hand in the.
see a hand.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
That's really loud. Thank you for being here. My name is Chef Maria Kemp, and I own a business called Beyond Decadence, and I infuse desserts into diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging training. And the question I have for you is, how do you think we're doing at educating individuals on what being an ally or allyship is?
How do we, I think the question was, how do we educate individuals on what allyship is?
How are we doing at educating individuals on what being an ally or
Being an ally.
allyship is?
Yeah.
Got it. I think it's a great question, and it's going to require, one of the things that I talked, and I'm explicit, and I talk to folks about, is my white brothers and sisters that are here in the room, we need y'all. Like, I'll be 100% honest. Like, there is no progress to be had in this space that will just come from the individuals that are, a lot of times, the most marginalized to make that progress, right? So we're gonna need leadership. We need those that don't look like us, advocating for the ones, for what equity and inclusion look like across the board. And we have those folks on our campuses, right? We have those individuals in our organizations. So how do we activate them? I think one of the ways that we try to do that is allowing every individual to see their space in this journey. I've talked to folks that says, well, I grew up in X, Y, and Z place in South Carolina, and I don't see how this connects to me, right? But you know, when you start to talk to them about their journey, in whatever journey it is, they have a story to tell.
That's right.
And how do we do this work in a way that brings individuals to the table? I think the work is designed to do that. But then with that requires courage, right? And it's going to require all of us, regardless of how we're situated, to want to create that space as well. So I think the conversation about allyship is the first conversation. Finding that commonality, finding that common ground, finding a way to all of us to tell our story. And then when you can do that, then you can start to delve into the intersections and some of the difficulty as well.
And I agree with Julian. The one thing I would say is he's saying we need everyone who's in this room that matters. And like I tell people all the time that don't look like me, I need you, because we all know there's sometimes we go into certain rooms or speak to certain people and they're just shut off when they see me, right? But if I have someone else, a Caucasian male, go in and they're speaking, telling a story, it's received sometimes differently, right? So you need to make sure you have those allies around you and then help them, provide them with the tools, necessary tools, so they can be impactful in a positive way.
And I'm going to get this wrong because I can't remember, but at my current role, we just started a book club. And we're reading the book called Better Allies.
That's great.
And the first name of the lady is Karen. I'll have to get you the second name. But a very impactful book. And we are taking quotes and putting it in newsletters so that people who are not in the book club can hear it. But one of the first things that she said in the book was, this is not a race, this is a journey.
Yep.
And if as soon as we identify that our journey gonna have some bumps along the way, right? We may have to pivot, we may have to navigate in a different space, but we continue to run in this journey. So I leave you with that today. Redefine to elevate, adapt, collaborate, work, access. We need you, we need your voice in order to keep moving forward on this journey. Dr. Johnson, Dr. Williams, we want to thank you for being here today, and thank you for taking your time as we kick off this summit.
This is great. Very good.
Thank you so much. Absolutely.